I think between Alan and Carrie, they preached my sermon. I can just sit down now, right? No, that's absolutely right. It's kind of a two-message kind of day in that we're celebrating Jesus' triumphal entry, but the message is still on the cross. But we'll get there. Sunday's coming, right? Our theme for 2025 has been Live Like Jesus. And that theme comes out of a simple desire to follow Jesus and to learn better what that means. So we've been spending the entire year in the Gospel of Matthew, which means right now we are in that season leading up to Resurrection Sunday. Began 3 weeks ago. This season we call Lent, 40 days leading up to Passover and Resurrection Sunday. It's a time of self-examination and of repentance. So this season is normally referred to as Passion. Now, you've heard me say this, but it bears repeating, that we think of passion as a strong feeling or emotion, but the word actually comes from the Latin root meaning suffering. And the season of Passion is a time to allow ourselves to experience what Jesus experienced as he fully entered into our human experience. We want to fully enter into his passion, into his experience. So we talked about having the fellowship with Christ's sufferings, as Paul said. We talked about standing with Jesus as one who bears witness to the reality of who he is. Last week we read Galatians 2:20 about being crucified with Christ, and this week we are going to talk even more about identifying with Jesus in his death. Now, last Saturday a week ago, we were at Glenn and Mims for a wonderful meal, and we were together with some friends that we had known from our previous church there in Telford. And Joel Hackman was one of those at the table, and he was saying, he says, speaking of Easter, he said, I remember when we did this Passion play. It was an artistic rendering. Pamela Jacques was involved. It was like all set to music. And he said, I remember the scene where you were on the cross with your arms outstretched. Now, the other cast members had already come up and with their hands had drawn on the canvas, creating the blood streaks on the canvas behind me. And he said there was a point, he said, I was back in the sound booth and the lights were supposed to go down and the music was supposed to start, and that was your opportunity to kind of step away. He said, except in the sound booth we had difficulty queuing up the music. And so the lights didn't come down, and you were standing there for a really long time with your arms outstretched. And he said, I remember thinking to myself, oh my, Joel, that must be agonizing. He says, meanwhile, he said, here's Pamela standing here beside me just weeping at that moment of silence. Well, it was probably only a minute or two, but it seemed like an agonizingly long time. Now keep in mind, I was not actually being crucified. There were no nails through my hands. I was not actually whipped, just torn jeans. But I remember thinking to myself, how long can this go on? For Jesus, the drama was real. And identifying with him in his death means recognizing that he knows and understands our suffering. If you're following along in your outline, here's our outline today. He understands what it's like to feel like God is not there. He understands what defeat and death are like. And he also knows that this is not the end. So my mind goes to 2 Corinthians 4, verses 8 to 10. Paul writes this: "We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but ironically, Paul says, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, and we are not destroyed. Though suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies." Now, I don't know what you're going through today, but I'm pretty sure that whatever it is, Jesus has encountered worse. Even more, I believe that what Jesus went through can be an example and an inspiration to whatever it is you may be facing today. Maybe you're bearing your own cross. Jesus went before you. Maybe you are waiting in darkness. Jesus is with you. Maybe you are sitting in silence, feeling like there's nothing more you can do or say. And Jesus would say to you today, this isn't over. Resurrection Sunday is coming. But for now, for today, we are dying with Christ. So take a look at your outline with me. First of all, bearing the cross. We're going to begin in verse 31 of chapter 27. "And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. And as they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross." So, Simon of Cyrene, Cyrene being in North Africa, is a bystander on the day of Jesus' crucifixion who became part of the story. So, from North Africa, an African man, probably a Jew of some denomination, happened to be in town for the festival. And here's Jesus coming along the road, stumbling, physically unable to bear his own cross, and Simon is pressed into service. Now, the same Simon, Mark tells us, is the father of Alexander and Rufus. That's in Mark 15:21. A passerby named Simon, who was from Cyrene, was coming from the countryside just then, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. And then it says Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, the fact that these two guys are mentioned by name suggests that they were known to the early church, probably members of the church in Rome. And the point that somebody else is carrying Jesus' cross, well, that's an illustration of what we all should do in a metaphorical sense. You know, throughout Christian history, that phrase, bearing one's cross, has been applied to everything from suffering and dying for the sake of the gospel to simply just embracing the daily struggles of life, voluntarily and with a good attitude. So what's your cross today? What is it that you are called to bear? Does it help if you think of carrying your cross as perhaps carrying his cross? And this leads to the first fill in the blank. The cross should be borne daily. Let's continue in verse 33. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head, they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Another metaphor for suffering is drinking the cup. Remember James and John? They wanted to rule with Jesus, and what did Jesus ask them? They said, "Can you drink the cup?" That's in Matthew 20, verses 20 and 23. Jesus answered, "But you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" And they said to him, "We're able." And he said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant. It's for those for whom it was prepared by my Father." You know, everybody wants the glory. Nobody wants to suffer, right? Do any of you want to carry the cross or drink the cup? I didn't think so. I don't see any hands. What if it's not about the hardship? What if it's not just about suffering? What if it's just what you do because it's what you have to go through to get where it is you are going? This is what the writer of the Hebrews writes about Christ and the cross. He said, "We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. And now he is seated at the place of honor besides God's throne." Nobody likes to suffer. If you do, there's something seriously wrong with you. But the key to endurance is not to focus on the suffering, but on the joy. Simon of Cyrene, what you are doing right now was not your choice. It was forced upon you. But guess what, Simon? You and your sons have just earned a place in history because of what you did. James and John, you're going to have a place in history right alongside of Jesus. Maybe not the right and the left, but guess what? James, you will be the first one to be martyred. And John, you're going to be the last one. Not martyred, but it wasn't for lack of trying. The Apostle Paul boasts that he faces death every day. He writes this in 1 Corinthians 15, 30 and 31. "Why are we in danger every hour? I protest, brothers, by my pride in you, which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord. I die every day." The fact that Jesus had to suffer and that he prepared his disciples to suffer means that suffering is a normal part of life in a fallen world. If you're going through a hard time today, guess what? That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It's just life. It's these mortal bodies that break down over time. The warranty expires somewhere along the way. No extended warranties. It's from being around wounded people in a fallen world. You know why we're wounded? We're wounded because we're around wounded people in a fallen world. It is your cross, it is my cross to bear, and we will bear it every day. Here's the next fill in the blank. The cross must be borne voluntarily. voluntarily, picking up in verse 38. Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left, and those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads, saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and the elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, 'I'm the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. So those who are passing by the cross are mocking Jesus, telling him to come down from the cross. If you're so powerful, why do you stay up there? Well, Jesus already had this conversation with the disciples at the arrest. Do you remember what Jesus said? Take you to Matthew 26:53. "Don't you think I can call on my Father, and he would at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Do you get it? He didn't have to stay there. That's what makes him so powerful. Everything Jesus suffered was voluntary. He didn't have to do it. He did it willingly. His arrest, remember? He went willingly. I was with a gathering of pastors this week, and one of them was recalling having been in the Garden of Gethsemane. And if you've ever been there in the Garden of Gethsemane, you can see across the valley to the gate out of Jerusalem. He's like, I realized in that moment, sitting there in Gethsemane, Jesus would have seen the soldiers coming. They didn't sneak up on him. He knew they were coming. And he went willingly. You know, in his trial, all he had to do was keep his mouth shut, which he did most of the time. And what he said, he gave them exactly what they needed to hear. He did not retaliate against those who mocked him or those who crucified him. Why would he do that? Or why would he not do that? Because he knew it wasn't about him. Remember why he did it? For the joy set before him. He was thinking of you. He was thinking of me. And he trusted in God's plan, even when it was really, really hard. Maybe that's all we need to endure in this life. Maybe we just need to know that our suffering has a purpose. We just need to know that it's all somehow part of a greater plan. You know, if I believe and my life is committed to God and to serving His purpose, then guess what? Nothing I face is by accident, right? Everything that happens to me, I say, is one of two things. Either it's God's will, God planned it, but I don't believe that God actually wills bad things to happen. I believe that He allows bad things to happen. There's a difference, you know. So either it's God's plan, or it's something that he is allowing because he is turning a bad thing into a good thing, because that's what God does. Romans 8:28 backs me up on this. It says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Bearing our cross is living our lives with that purpose foremost in our minds. Let me use another metaphor. Talked about carrying the cross. Let's talk about waiting in darkness. Picking up in verse 45. "Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over the land until the 9th hour. And at about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?' That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So Matthew tells us there was about 3 hours of darkness while Jesus was in the cross. Now these, by the way, are the same 3 hours at which the sun should be its brightest, right? Somebody said, well, they experienced a solar eclipse. Have you ever experienced a 3-hour solar eclipse? That unusual phenomena coincided with Jesus declaring that he felt this separation from God the Father. Thanks, Alan, for introducing that to us. That darkness was a supernatural illustration, a supernatural manifestation of that separation. Have you ever felt that darkness? Here's your next fill in the blank. Sometimes God seems absent. Sometimes God seems absent. Picking up in verse 47, "And some of the bystanders hearing it said, 'This man is calling Elijah.' And one of them at once ran, took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, 'Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come and save him.' And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit." So the reason why Matthew tells us exactly what Jesus said in Aramaic, those were the words that were hard to pronounce, is he wanted us to understand that those who were standing by the cross misunderstood what he said and thought he was calling for Elijah. But he wasn't calling for Elijah. So Eli, he was calling on God. El is the general pronoun for God. That's basic Hebrew. And then it's in the vocative tense, which means that he was making direct address to God. So essentially it's like saying, "Hey God!" What Jesus is literally saying is, "Hey God, where are you? Why did you suddenly leave me?" And not only that, but he's quoting Psalm 22. You want some powerful meditation this week? Just spend time in Psalm 22, the whole psalm. Because it's all reflective of that time that Jesus spent on the cross. But I'll just give you the first 2 verses. my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest." Can you relate to that feeling? You ever been there? I have. Here's another question. Did you know that Jesus can relate to you relating to that feeling? He felt that separation from God. He knows what it feels like to feel all alone in the universe. Sometimes it seems like God is absent when we feel all alone, but the beauty is that God himself knows that feeling. But it's just a feeling. Here's your next fill in the blank. At those times when God seems absent, at those times he is most present. At those very times he is most present. Psalm 139, beginning in verse 7, David writes, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Where should I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol," which is death, by the way, "you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say," remember we said there's 3 hours of darkness, "if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. And the night is bright as day, for darkness is as light with you." God is present, even when we don't feel his presence. Even when we're all alone in our suffering, God is especially present at those times. But it's also at those times when we don't feel it, we just have to know it. You see, when we can't see it or feel it, we can still take it by faith. And what happens next illustrates God's presence so powerfully, even in that darkness. Verse 51. "And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the earth shook, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened. And many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, 'Truly, this was the Son of God.' There were also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to them. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee." Do you get the picture? In the darkest moment in history, literally, the curtain in the temple, the very symbol of the separation between God and man, is ripped from top to bottom. Why top to bottom? That means God did it. God removed the barrier to his presence. And that event was an earth-shattering event. I mean, literally, the earth shook. Rocks, immovable objects were split. There is no barrier that can stand between God and his people, not even death itself. I mean, literally, dead people are seen walking around. Can you imagine that? Decomposed bodies are seen in town, walking around. time and matter no longer matter. The invisible realm is no longer invisible. Isn't this cool? I mean, based on this testimony, we don't have to ask where people go after they die. Guess what? Some of them are still here. They've been here all along. We just couldn't see them. Reality just became very real. How do we know? Well, you have the testimony of the Roman soldier. I love this. I'm glad you pointed that out, Alan. I mean, think about how incredible this is. I mean, here is a man who believes in power. He lives by his sword, by what he can see and feel and do. And this is the man. He points to the man on the cross and he says, surely this is the Son of the gods, being a Roman, or the Son of God, as we would understand it. Do you get the irony of this? A Roman soldier is saying that the man who is helpless dying on a cross is more powerful than he is. Why? Because death is now irrelevant. Power and status means nothing. The natural world, all that we know, all that we've been living for, guess what? It's only a fraction of reality. When you realize who Jesus is, it changes the way you see everything. Like this guy, this Roman soldier, you're just standing there in awe. There's nothing you can say. And sometimes the best thing that needs to be said is to say nothing at all. Let's talk about sitting in silence. Picking up with verse 57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and he asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. So Joseph is this well-connected individual who obtains the body of Jesus and puts it in his own tomb. Now, wealthy families in Israel had tombs which were essentially caves, right? I visited one of them when I was in Israel, and you go in there, you go into this hole in the side of the rock there, and there's a couple of slabs there where you lay the recently deceased bodies, and then you come back after a year and some months, and you gather up the bones, and you put them in a box, and that goes over into a separate chamber. And that entire year, until you do the second burial, it's all a time of mourning. When somebody dies in Jewish tradition, there's actually a long process. There's several phases of mourning, but in the first phase, you may have heard this term, you sit Shiva. Shiva means 7. It's a period of time, usually a few days, up to a week, up to 7 days, where you come to the family's home and you just sit there silently. You just sit. You don't talk. You don't say anything there. You're not supposed to say anything. You're just supposed to be there. Notice what Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, are doing in this passage. They're sitting across from the tomb. Sitting Shiva. Just sitting there. Silently. We could use more of that in our culture, don't you think? Here's your next fill in the blank. It's what you do when you think you are down that matters the most. It's what you do when you think you're down that matters the most. I know oftentimes we're tempted to think, well, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm down. No, it's what you do when you're down that matters the most. Remember, at this point in the story, nobody, except for Jesus, knows about the resurrection. Nobody knew how the story was going to end, but that doesn't mean that the story is over. Sometimes we just have to trust God with what we don't know and what we can't see. 1 Corinthians 5:7 says, "For we live by believing, not by seeing." Why does God allow suffering? I don't know. We usually don't know. But what we do know is that God is not asking us to go through anything that He has not already faced. Think about what He allowed His own Son to suffer for us. Some of the most compelling evidence for Jesus' divinity is the remarkable way in which He conducted Himself like no human would when facing death. And in the same way, some of the most compelling evidence for the authenticity of the gospel is the way Jesus' followers have conducted themselves when persecuted, when tortured and harassed, when they, like Jesus, have faced death. True Jesus followers continue to amaze and astound the world by living like Jesus in their darkest hour. Throughout history, countless believers have endured persecution, but have remained steadfast in their faith. One notable example is Richard Wurmbrand. Maybe you've read his story. It's called Tortured for Christ. He was imprisoned for his faith in communist Romania. Despite brutal torture, he preached to his fellow inmates, even his captors. And Wurmbrand and his wife became co-founders of Voice of the Martyrs. Perhaps you've heard of them. It's an organization that now tells the stories of thousands of Christians all over the world who demonstrate Christ's love and sacrifice in the most difficult circumstances. You know, when you read stories like his, you have to ask, how do they do it? How do people endure under such conditions? Well, by living like Jesus. They have their sights, they have their eyes set on something different. That life as we know, it is not all that there is. There's so much more. And that's our last fill in the blank. Even death is not final. Even death is not final. Let's finish up this chapter. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people he has risen from the dead, and the last fraud would be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers? Go. Make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting the guard. Now, I find this really ironic because the disciples, they write, after the resurrection, they never expected it. They were caught totally by surprise, but the Pharisees somehow expected it. It's good they suspected it, because they just became the best proof that the resurrection was real. The tomb was secure. Nobody could open it. Soldiers were guarding it. They thought they were putting a seal on death, but they were sealing Christ's victory. Now, I know this has been a difficult message. Carrie tried to warn you. Jesus is in the tomb. The women are weeping. The disciples, well, they're scattered. Soldiers are guarding the tomb. Things are looking pretty dark, both literally and metaphorically. And this is where the episode ends, and the words, "To be continued," come across the screen. It's not like a TV show. You don't have to wait till next season. But first, let's reflect on what we've learned. Pat. Number one, what is your cross that you are bearing today? I know. Everybody always has something. You know, oftentimes we look at people and we just think everybody else has it all together. No, after years of being a pastor, I know that whenever I look at somebody, everybody is going through something. You can count on it. Can you face it voluntarily, following Jesus' example? Is it possible? Is it possible that something you are going through right now could be an opportunity for God to be glorified through you? Number two, has God ever seemed absent to you? And what do you see when you look back on that time or those times? Go back. God, where were you in that situation? Can you show me what you were doing? It's a good question to ask. I often do that in a counseling session. Now let's go back. Let's ask God, God, where were you at that time? Or maybe you're in that situation right now. Then I would just ask this question: what is it that you can know to be true, even though you might not feel it? Number three, Perhaps the best reflection is one without words. Maybe what we need to do right now is just take a moment to sit in silence. Where is God in this moment? How can you know it instinctively without seeing anything? And what does the intensity of what you're feeling in this moment, what does that tell you about your faith? Let's worship the Lord together.